My name's Walter Harris and I'm 68 years old, though most days I swear I feel closer to 100. You know, at my age, you start to think you've seen everything life has to offer. Love, loss, heartbreak, a few good laughs in between. I've buried friends, built homes, raised a family, and watched the sun rise over the same Texas hills for more than half my life. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the kind of betrayal that came from within my own blood. It wasn't a stranger who broke me. It wasn't some greedy businessman or an old rival trying to settle a score. It wasn't a thief who snuck in under the cover of night. It was family, my own daughter-in-law, the woman my son trusted with his heart, his fortune, and his legacy, the woman I once called daughter without hesitation. If you'd told me a decade ago that one day she'd throw me out of my own house, take every cent my boy built, $55 million of hard-earned, honest wealth, and leave me standing in the driveway with nothing but a walking stick and an old duffel bag filled with memories. Well, mate, I would have laughed right in your face. I would have told you there's no way something like that could happen under God's sky. But here I am, proof that sometimes the devil doesn't come wearing horns. Sometimes he shows up in a designer dress with a smile that could melt ice. You see, betrayal hits different when it comes from someone you once trusted completely. It's not the act itself that destroys you. It's the slow realization that you never really knew them at all. I remember that day like it's burned into my skin. The look on her face, calm as a lake before a storm. The tone of her voice, polite, almost apologetic, as if throwing an old man out of his own home was just another item on her to-do list. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She didn't even flinch when I asked her, "Why are you doing this, Sam?" All she said was, "It's business, Walter. Don't take it personally." Those 5 words, they gutted me. I built that home with my own 2 hands. My son Ethan bought it back for me after he made it big. Told me it was his way of paying me back for every nail I hammered, every roof I fixed. That house wasn't just wood and stone. It was our history. It was Sunday dinners, birthdays, Christmas mornings, Linda's laughter echoing through the hallways. And in one cruel afternoon, it was gone. But here's the part that still makes me chuckle. Not out of joy, but out of the bitter irony of it all. A few months after she kicked me out, after she'd taken everything and made damn sure I had nothing left, that same woman came crawling back, begging for help. Yeah, you heard me right, she came back, and the look in her eyes then, it wasn't pride anymore. It wasn't greed or power. It was fear. Pure, desperate fear. Now I know what you might be thinking right now. Walter, why didn't you just shut the door in her face? Why not let her drown in the mess she made? And trust me, that thought crossed my mind more times than I can count. But see, life's funny that way. The older you get, the more you realize revenge isn't always about anger. Sometimes it's about balance, about justice, about watching the very hands that once shoved you into the mud now reaching out for help, and you standing there, deciding whether to pull them up, or let them see what the bottom feels like. I'll tell you this much, and I didn't plan for revenge right away. At first, I just wanted to survive. When you've lost your son, your wife, your home, and the last bit of dignity you had left, revenge feels like a luxury you can't afford. You're too busy trying to remember who you are. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to see things clearly. The truth. The rot that had been hiding behind those smiles and expensive dinners, and I realized something. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. So sit back, wherever you are. Maybe you're driving home from work, maybe lying in bed, maybe sipping coffee on your porch. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about greed or payback. It's a story about family, about love twisted into betrayal, about pain turning into purpose, and about how one man found justice not through fury, but through wisdom. This isn't some Hollywood fantasy where the hero wins and rides off into the sunset. This is real life. My life. It's messy. It's painful. It's raw, but it's honest. Before the lies, before the lawyers, before the headlines, there was just me, my boy Ethan, and the life we built with hard work and good faith. A family that once stood strong together. And that's where this story really begins. The day I lost everything didn't happen overnight. It started years before, with small cracks, polite smiles, and whispers I ignored because I wanted to believe the best in people. Especially in her, but sometimes the people closest to you, the ones who sit at your dinner table, share your laughter, and call you dad. Now they're the ones who end up holding the sharpest knives. So, before you judge me, before you decide what I should have done, just remember, this could happen to anyone. One wrong trust, one blind eye, one signature on the wrong piece of paper, and your whole world can crumble like a house made of cards. I still remember the morning it all began, the one that changed everything. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and I had no idea that before nightfall, my life would take a turn I'd never recover from. That morning, I woke up thinking it would be an ordinary day, but it became the day my world cracked open. The day that started it all. The day I learned that sometimes the worst kind of enemy is family. You know, when people talk about the American dream, they usually picture a white picket fence, a steady job, and a couple of kids running barefoot through the yard. But for me, and for my boy, Ethan, that dream was a house built not just from wood and nails, but from love, sweat, and a promise. I was born in a small Texas town where men shook hands to seal a deal and your word was your signature. My old man was a hard man, not cruel, just carved out of rougher times. He taught me two things: never lie, and never let another man do your job better than you can do it yourself. So I learned to work. Real work, the kind that puts calluses on your palms and pride in your chest. By 16, I was on job sites. By 40, I had my own crew. We didn't build skyscrapers or malls, we built homes. Places where families laughed, fought, and grew old. And through all those years, I kept one dream tucked in the back of my mind, that my son would have it better than I did. Ethan, my pride, my miracle. He was different from me. I used to joke that he was born holding a calculator, not a hammer. While I was sweating under the Texas sun, he was running numbers in his head, figuring out how to make the dollars stretch. He had that natural charm too, could walk into a room and own it without saying a word. When his mother passed away, cancer, God rest her soul, Ethan was only 19. That boy could have fallen apart. Instead, he went to college, got his degree in finance, and before I knew it, he was flipping homes faster than I could build them. By the time he hit 35, he wasn't just successful, he was wealthy. Like newspaper article wealthy. Built a real estate company from the ground up, managed deals in 3 states, and even made it onto some local business magazines, top 40 under 40. I was proud. Damn proud. He called me one spring afternoon, voice full of excitement. "Dad, I'm buying the ranch." "The Miller place?" I asked, stunned. That land had been in another family for generations. Rolling green fields, a river cutting through it, and a sunset that painted the sky orange every evening. "That's the one," he said. "I'm rebuilding it. Big stone house, wraparound porch, stables, guest house, everything you and Mom ever dreamed of." And he did it. In less than a year, that land became something out of a postcard. A house made of stone and love. He handed me the keys himself. "This is yours, old man," he laughed. "You've worked enough. Now it's time you rest." For a while I did. I'd wake up with the sun, sip my coffee on the porch, and watch the horses graze. Life finally felt peaceful, the kind of peace that comes after years of noise. Then she came along. Samantha. She was the kind of woman that turns heads when she walks into a room. Not because she's the prettiest, but because she knows she's the prettiest. Perfect posture, polished smile, and that perfume. The kind that smells like money and trouble mixed together. Ethan met her at some charity gala in Dallas. I remember him calling me, voice full of that boyish excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Dad, she's amazing. You'll love her." I didn't, not at first. Not ever, really. See, there's a kind of kindness that's real. The kind that makes you feel warm inside. And then there's the kind that's performed, like a line from a play. That was Sam. She said all the right words, smiled at all the right moments, but her eyes were always calculating. Still, Ethan was smitten. And when my boy fell, he fell hard. They got married in the backyard of that very ranch. Fairy lights strung up across the trees, violinists playing soft music, everyone dressed like it was some high society event. And for a while I thought maybe I'd been wrong about her. Maybe she really did love my son. A year later they had Noah, my grandson. Ah, that boy. He brought color back into my world. Little curls bouncing in the Texas wind, running barefoot across the porch calling out Grandpa Walt. With that giggle that could melt stone. I'd sit for hours watching him play in the dirt with his toy trucks. The same kind of dirt I used to build my life on. For a few golden years, everything felt right again. Family dinners, laughter echoing through the hallways, Ethan busy but happy, and me, content. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe I've finally earned my peace. But peace has a funny way of slipping through your fingers. Ethan's business started booming, and with it came the long trips. London, Dubai, Tokyo, deals, partnerships, investments. Words I barely understood, but that made his eyes light up. Sam, meanwhile, seemed to love the high life a little too much. Designer clothes, private jets, diamond necklaces. She was chasing an image, not a marriage. I tried to ignore it. Told myself, she's young, Walt, let her have her fun. But then the little things started happening. She'd correct me in front of the staff. It's Samantha, not Sam. She'd snap when I slipped. She'd complain about how cluttered the house was with my old furniture, the same pieces Ethan and I had built together. Once, she even suggested that I move into the guest house because, in her words, you deserve your own space, away from all the noise. The noise being them. Ethan tried to keep the peace. Dad, she doesn't mean it that way, he'd say. She's just adjusting, but I knew better. I'd seen enough houses collapse from the inside to recognize when the foundation's starting to crack. And then came the call. It was a Tuesday night. The kind of night where the sky feels heavy, like it knows something bad's about to happen. I was sitting on the porch, Noah asleep in my lap, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, Mr. Harris, a voice said. This is Dr. Patel from Dallas Memorial. I'm afraid your son's been in an accident. My heart dropped. That was the night everything changed. That was the night the house that love built began to crumble. It was a Thursday evening, one of those golden Texas evenings where the air's heavy with the smell of grilled meat and summer dust. I remember it clear as daylight. I'd just set 2 ribeyes on the porch table, poured myself a cold beer, and was about to sit down when the phone rang. You ever get that feeling, deep in your gut, that something bad's about to happen before you even answer? That was me. My hand shook as I picked up the phone. Mr. Harris? A woman's voice said on the other end, calm, professional, almost too careful. This is Rachel from Baylor Medical Center. Your son's been in an accident. For a moment, my brain refused to register the words. An accident? I said, my voice cracking. He okay? There was a pause, the kind that freezes time. I'm so sorry, sir, she said. It was a head-on collision. A drunk driver. He didn't make it. And just like that, the world went silent. The steak slipped from my hand. The beer spilled across the table. My knees buckled. I remember the way the porch boards creaked as I fell. The phone hit the floor, still buzzing faintly with the nurse's voice. Inside, Linda, my wife, and must have heard me drop. She came running, apron still on, her hands covered in flour. Walter? What happened? I couldn't say it. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Only one sound. A hollow, broken sob that didn't sound like it came from me. When I finally got the words out, they didn't even sound real. Ethan's gone, Linda screamed. She hit the ground next to me, clutching my arm, crying into my shoulder. The smell of burned steak filled the air. The world, for the first time in my life, stopped turning. The next few days were a blur. Hospital visits, police reports, signatures. All I remember is the smell of antiseptic, the sound of heart monitors in that sterile white hallway where I stood staring at my son's body. He looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Like he could just open his eyes any second and say, "Hey, Dad, I'm fine." It was just a bad dream. But dreams end. Death doesn't. They told us the driver was 23, walked away with a few bruises. My son, my only son, was gone because some fool couldn't hold his liquor. The funeral came a week later. It was the kind of day that shouldn't exist. Blue skies, birds chirping, sunlight glinting off polished caskets. The world shouldn't look that beautiful when your heart's being ripped out. The whole town came. Employees, business partners, old schoolmates. Cameras even. Local news wanted to cover it. Tragic death of real estate magnate Ethan Harris. Sam, or Samantha as she started insisting, stood at the front, draped in black silk. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her face stayed perfect. No red eyes, no trembling lip, just staged sorrow. She looked like a woman performing grief for an audience. I told myself I was being unfair, that people grieve differently. But then in the middle of the service, she leaned over and whispered to one of Ethan's business partners. Whispered. At her husband's funeral. That was the first crack in the mask. After the service, she clung to me and Linda, voice trembling. I don't know what I'm going to do, she said. Ethan handled everything. I can't let his company fall apart. I'll take over just until things settle. For Noah. For Noah. That's how she framed every decision after that. And at first I believed her. Ethan had built his company from the ground up, Harris Developments. He'd set it up so his family would never have to worry again. And when the will was read, it reflected that half of everything went to Sam, half in trust for Noah. I was fine with that. It was fair. Ethan wanted his family cared for, that's who he was, but Sam, she had other plans. 2 weeks after the funeral, she called a meeting, said she wanted to discuss the company's future. I went, thinking it'd be about keeping Ethan's legacy alive. Instead, I walked into her office and saw 3 strangers sitting there. Suits, expensive watches, cold eyes. Walter, she smiled too brightly. This is Mr. Klein, our new financial advisor. And this is Ms. Rowan, legal counsel. New? I frowned. What happened to George and Lisa? They've been with Ethan for years, she waved her hand. They were old school, didn't understand digital growth strategies. We're restructuring. Restructuring. That word hit me wrong. I'd been in construction too long. I knew that when someone said restructuring, it usually meant tearing something down. I looked at her desk. New decor. Framed photos of her and Noah, no picture of Ethan. Not one. I asked where his office things were. His leather chair, his photo of Mom, the one he kept by his desk. Oh, those old things, she said, shrugging. They didn't fit the aesthetic. I left before I said something I'd regret. Over the next few months, everything changed. She sold Ethan's private jet, his Dallas condo, 3 ranches, and half his real estate portfolio. Claimed it was to stabilize assets. She moved into high society circles. Charity luncheons, magazine interviews, new designer clothes every week. Meanwhile, Noah barely saw his grandfather anymore. Every time I called, the nanny answered. Mrs. Harris is busy. When I finally confronted her, she brushed me off like a fly. Walter, I know this is hard for you, she said in that syrupy tone. But you don't understand modern finance. Ethan's assets were complicated. I'm handling it. Her voice had changed too, crisp, sharp, no warmth left. Like the woman she'd been was buried with Ethan. One night I sat alone on the porch staring at the stars. The ranch, Ethan's ranch, felt emptier than ever. His laugh, his footsteps, even his stupid off-key singing in the kitchen. Gone, and somewhere deep down I felt a shift. That old gut instinct. The same one that warned me years ago when Sam first smiled that perfect smile. Something wasn't right. I didn't know it yet. But that was the beginning of the end. The start of the storm that would tear apart everything left of my family. And I, Walter Harris, 68, tired and broken, was about to face a betrayal deeper than anything I'd ever imagined. The day it happened, the sky was so clear it almost mocked me. Not a cloud in sight. Sunlight spilling over the porch where I'd spent half my life watching sunrises, birthdays, and backyard barbecues. The air smelled like spring, honeysuckle, and dust. And for a brief second, I thought maybe it was going to be a good day. I was wrong. Sam pulled up in her black Mercedes, the same one Ethan had surprised her with for their 5th anniversary. Only this time she wasn't alone. 2 men stepped out behind her, both wearing suits sharp enough to cut glass. I walked out onto the porch, wiping my hands on a rag. Morning, Sam, I said, trying to sound calm. Didn't know you were stopping by. She didn't answer right away. She just reached into her leather bag and pulled out an envelope. Thick, official-looking, sealed with the kind of weight you can feel before you even touch it. Walter, she said, her voice smooth but cold. I need you and Linda to leave the ranch by the end of the week. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I honestly thought I'd misheard her. Leave. What are you talking about? This is our home. Ethan bought it for us. Her smile tightened. Actually, the property is under the Harris Holdings Trust, which, as Ethan's widow, I now control. I've decided to liquidate some assets. That word, liquidate. It hit me like a sledgehammer. You're selling our house? I asked, the words catching in my throat. She nodded like she was discussing the weather. It's not personal, Walter. It's business, not personal. Not personal. I built half the damn deck with my own hands. I planted those oak trees out back. Linda's rose garden. She'd tended it every morning since Ethan gave her that first bag of seeds. This house, I said, stepping closer, was a gift from my son. He promised us this would be our home until the day we die. Sam's eyes met mine, flat, unfeeling, like looking into the eyes of someone who'd already erased you from their life. Promises don't always hold up legally, she said, her tone clipped. You can contact my lawyers if you have questions. Her lawyers. I looked at the two men behind her, young, smug, with clipboards and expensive watches. They wouldn't meet my eyes. They didn't have to. They already knew the outcome. Linda came out then, drying her hands on a towel. Sam, she said, her voice trembling. What's going on? Sam turned to her like she was talking to a neighbor she barely knew. I'm sorry, Linda, but we need to sell this property. It's too large to maintain and the taxes are ridiculous. You'll have time to gather your things. Linda froze. Sell? You're selling Ethan's home? Sam shrugged. Ethan built a company worth millions. I'm doing what's best for his legacy and for Noah's future. Noah's future. She always used that line. Like every greedy decision was somehow justified by that boy's name. I stepped forward, my voice shaking now, not from fear, but from rage. Don't you dare use my grandson to excuse this. Ethan didn't build this empire so you could throw his parents out like trash. One of the suited men stepped between us. Sir, please, I held up a hand. Don't sir me. You're standing on land my son bought for his family or for all of us. You don't get to erase that with one damn envelope. Sam's mask slipped then, just for a second. I saw it, that flicker in her eyes. Not guilt, not sorrow, just greed, cold, clean greed. I understand this is emotional, she said, regaining her composure, but I've made my decision. You'll receive a small allowance from the trust, enough to get by. I suggest you start looking for a place. I couldn't even speak. Linda started crying, begging, Sam, please, this isn't right. But Sam just turned away, motioning for the men to follow her, and then she left. Her tires crunched over the gravel driveway as she drove off, the same driveway Ethan and I had poured by hand. I stood there, the wind tugging at my shirt, the envelope still unopened in my hand. By the end of that week, we were gone, two old souls packing 40 years of life into a few boxes and an old duffel bag. The movers came, not our people, hers, and carried everything out while Linda cried quietly in the corner. I watched them take Ethan's photo off the mantel. The one from his college graduation. The one where he'd wrapped his arm around me and said, We did it, Dad. Now it was being wrapped in newspaper and thrown into a box like it meant nothing. When the trucks finally pulled away, the house looked hollow, empty, like all the laughter and love had been sucked out of it. Noah came running out from the porch, barefoot, his little voice cracking. Grandpa, don't go. I dropped my bag and knelt down, holding his shoulders. His eyes were red, his hair a mess. Hey, I whispered. It's okay, buddy. Grandpa just needs to go away for a little while. He shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. Mom said you can't stay, but I want you to. I want you here. I felt my throat close. I know, kiddo. I want that too. Then Sam's voice came from behind him, cold, commanding. Noah, inside. He looked at her, then back at me. Why, Mom? Why can't Grandpa stay? And then she said it, words I still hear in my nightmares. Because Grandpa doesn't belong here anymore. I stood there, watching my grandson being led away like I was some stranger who'd wandered onto their land. My own blood. That night, Linda and I checked into a small motel off the highway. She sat by the window, holding Ethan's picture in her hands, silent tears streaming down her face. And me, I just stared at the ceiling, my mind burning with the same thought over and over. She took everything, the house, the company, the legacy, even my place in my grandson's life. But I didn't know then that fate, or maybe karma, had its own way of evening the scales. Because one day soon, that same woman who threw me out with nothing would come crawling back, desperate, terrified, and begging for help, and that, my friend, would be the beginning of her reckoning. We moved into a run-down roadside motel off Highway 80, the kind of place that smelled like old coffee, bleach, and regret. The paint peeled off the walls like shedding skin, and the carpet had seen better decades. We had one small room, two squeaky twin beds, and a single flickering light that buzzed like a dying bee. That's where the great Walter Harris, the man who built half the luxury homes in Travis County, ended up. In a room that couldn't even keep the rain out. Linda sat on the edge of her bed that first night holding our wedding photo. The corners were bent from the move, the glass cracked right through our faces. A perfect metaphor for what was left of us. She looked up at me, eyes hollow, voice barely a whisper. "Walter," she said. "How could she do this?" I didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense anyway. How do you explain greed to someone who's only ever loved with their whole heart? How do you tell your wife that the woman your son trusted, the woman who called you dad at one point, had turned you into strangers overnight? So I didn't. I just sat down beside her, took her hand, and stared at the ceiling while that damn light kept buzzing. The days after that blurred together like one long stretch of gray. In the mornings, I'd walk to the diner across the street, buy the cheapest cup of coffee they had, and sit there for hours when pretending to read the paper, pretending I still had somewhere to be. The waitress, a kind woman named Marla, used to refill my cup without asking. She must have seen through me. Back at the motel, Linda kept mostly to herself. She'd stare out the window watching the cars roll by, her reflection faint and tired in the glass. Every so often she'd ask, "Have you talked to Noah?" Every time I had to shake my head. I'd tried calling Sam over and over. First she ignored me, then she blocked my number. I called the office on the one my son had built from scratch, the one with his name carved into the lobby wall, only to be told, "Mr. Harris, Mrs. Samantha Harris no longer wishes to take your calls. Mrs. Samantha Harris." She'd even rebranded herself. A week later, I checked the company's website out of curiosity. Ethan's name was gone. "Completely erased," the new banner read. Samantha Holdings International, building a future beyond legacy. Even the company logo had changed, sleeker, colder, like her. It was as if my boy had never existed. I sat there staring at that screen, the motel Wi-Fi barely holding, feeling something deep inside me twist and tear. All those years Ethan spent building that empire, all the nights he'd called me for advice, the sweat and grind, gone with the stroke of her pen. And me? I was left with nothing but memories and bills. Humiliation settled in like rust. I was too proud to ask for help, too angry to sleep. My hands, once steady as stone, started trembling when I held my coffee. I'd built homes worth millions, but now I couldn't even fix a leaky faucet in our motel bathroom. Linda tried to stay strong for me. God bless her, she did, but the hurt ate at her from the inside. She'd lost her son, her home, and the life we'd built, all in one cruel sweep. She stopped eating much. She stopped laughing altogether. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting by the window, holding Ethan's photo, whispering prayers to a God who felt like he wasn't listening anymore. One night, she turned to me, her voice small, fragile, like a child's. "Walter," she said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." I reached for her hand, rough and cold from the air conditioning that never worked right. "You hang on, love," I whispered. "I'll fix this. I don't know how yet, but I will." But inside, I didn't believe my own words because the truth was, I was lost, broken, powerless. A month later, Linda passed away in her sleep. No warning. No final words. Just gone. The motel manager knocked on my door that morning, complaining that our rent was late. When I turned around and saw her lying there, still peaceful, something inside me snapped. I sat beside her for what felt like hours, holding her hand, waiting for her to wake up. I kept whispering her name as if I could bring her back by sheer will, but she didn't move. When the paramedics finally came, I stood outside while they carried her body away in a black bag. Cars kept passing on the highway, horns honking, engines roaring, like the world didn't even notice she was gone. I buried her in a small cemetery just outside town. No grand funeral, no fancy flowers. Just me, the pastor, and a handful of dust. I couldn't even afford a proper headstone then. Just a wooden cross with her name carved into it by my pocket knife. And when the dirt hit the coffin, I swear I felt something break in my chest. It wasn't just grief. It was finality, everything. My son, my wife, my home, my purpose. Gone. After the funeral, I drove back to the motel and sat outside under the buzzing neon sign that read, "Vacancy." The sign blinked on and off, like it was mocking me. Vacancy, and that's what I'd become, empty, hollow. Just a man-shaped shell filled with memories and anger. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the stars through the thick Texas haze and made myself a promise. If I couldn't build a new life, I'd rebuild my purpose. If I couldn't bring Linda or Ethan back, I'd bring something else to life, like something stronger. Revenge isn't always born from rage. Sometimes it's born from loss, quiet, patient, and determined. And that night, under that buzzing neon light, something inside me changed. It wasn't just anger anymore, it was purpose. Cold, clear, purpose. I didn't know how I'd do it yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Samantha Harris had taken everything from me, and one day she was going to pay. I spent weeks pacing that little motel room like a caged animal, but I wasn't thinking about punching walls or any of that nonsense. I wanted something cleaner, smarter. I wanted her to lose what she cherished most: power, control, and that spotless reputation she polished every morning like a trophy. I wanted her to feel the hollow pit she'd shoved me into. So I began to dig, slow, quiet, methodical, the kind of digging that doesn't need a shovel, just stubbornness and the willingness to learn. At 68, I'll admit I'm not a tech wizard, but you'd be amazed what a library card, an internet kiosk, and a little stubborn pride can teach a man. I spent afternoons in public libraries, the fluorescent lights humming above me, scribbling names and dates into a battered notebook, learning to pull public records from county clerk databases, reading through corporate filings, and tracing property transfers line by line. I went down to the county courthouse 2 towns over and sat in the records room for hours, leafing through dusty ledgers while clerks gave me those looks like I had no business being there. Maybe I didn't, but I had a purpose. I learned how trusts could be shifted, how shell companies wore other names like masks, and how a clever enough signature could make a deed say whatever you wanted it to say. It wasn't glamour work. It was paperwork and patience. I followed addresses and matched them to P.O. boxes, then cross-checked names against charity registrations and LLC filings. The first time I saw the pattern, my hands went cold. Small transfers that didn't match any business activity. Corporate names that meant nothing on the surface but reappeared in different states. Payouts into accounts in places that sound like postcards. Cayman, Bermuda, shell companies with names like Cedar, Ridge Holdings, and Blue Harbor. Investments. My stomach turned when I found documents where Noah's name was used as a beneficiary on accounts that should have required multiple signatories. The signatures were nearly identical to Samantha's, but the way they bent on the paper, the pressure, the slant, told a different story if you know how to read handwriting. That's when I rang Rick Miller. Rick and I go back a long way. He's the kind of old-school private investigator who still carries a little black notebook and knows how to get quiet answers without making a scene. When I told him the name, he chuckled and called me spicy for poking the hornet's nest, but he showed up the next morning with his old truck and a steady jaw. Rick did the things I couldn't: tailing couriers who carried briefcases into anonymous offices, pulling banking leads from places where a layman shouldn't be poking around, getting discrete copies of receipts and emails that didn't belong in public files. For 3 months we worked like that. Me with my notebooks and courthouse coffee, him with his contacts and patience, and what he turned up made even him whistle low in awe. There were offshore accounts tied by a web of intermediaries, donations to charities that had no physical address and no real beneficiaries, a fake real estate fund on paper that existed only to shuffle money around, and invoices so cleverly fabricated they would have fooled any accountant who wanted to be fooled. It wasn't just sloppy greed. It was a deliberate, quiet siphoning of Ethan's trust into places that kept her name clean, but filled other pockets. It hit me like a blow when I realized she'd been using Ethan's company as a cover, taking sums from legitimate sales and transferring them into those ghost entities, falsifying board minutes, forging approvals from people who'd never signed anything. Fraud, plain as day, if you knew where to look. But fraud without proof is just an accusation, and I wasn't a man inclined to throw around accusations without a foundation. That would make me petty, and worse, it would make me look like the broken old dad she'd already painted me as. So I gathered everything we'd found: Photocopies of filings, scanned emails Rick had pulled from a forgotten server, ledgers with the funny transfers circled, notarized affidavits from a former accountant who'd hinted at irregularities and then been quietly let go, and the handwriting comparisons Rick's friend in forensics had done in secret. I cut and taped and labeled like a man assembling a blueprint, because that's what it was, a blueprint of her theft. Then, because showing up on her doorstep with a fistful of accusations would have been theatrics, I sent the packet to the Texas Financial Crimes Division anonymously, with certified mail and a forwarding address that traced back to a P.O. box I'd rented under an alias. I didn't do it for vengeance that screams. I did it so the law could do the heavy, noisy work and the truth could step into the light. After I mailed that envelope, I sat back in my plastic motel chair and felt a strange sense of calm, like a man who had finally lit the fuse on something that had to happen. Waiting was agony, sure, but it was the kind of waiting that felt righteous. At night I lay awake imagining the dominoes falling. Board meetings called, auditors sniffing around, bank seals stamped, headlines that would finally name what my gut and my ruined notebook had known for months. I was careful, though. I didn't celebrate. My purpose wasn't to watch her burn. It was to make sure the scales righted themselves. And while I waited, the small, dangerous spark that had started as anger sharpened into something colder and steadier. Resolve. I reckon that's the difference between a man who loses everything and a man who decides to fight, not with fists, but with patience, proof, and the law. It started like most big things do, with a whisper that grows into a roar. I was halfway through a cup of that motel coffee that tastes like burnt rubber and regrets when the TV in the diner flicked to the morning news. I'd been trying to keep a routine, get up, 2 walks around the parking lot, coffee, stare at the highway until noon. Comfort in small things, but that morning the anchor's voice cut through the hum like a knife. Breaking story, she said. Businesswoman Samantha Harris under federal investigation for tax fraud and embezzlement. My spoon clinked against the cup. I turned the volume up before I even realized I'd moved. There she was on the screen, Sam, walking out of her downtown office, hair pulled back sloppy, a suit that used to make people hush when she entered a room, and a pair of sunglasses that couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. Cameras flashed like lightning and reporters shouted questions at her, quick as mosquitoes. Her mouth moved, she said something about cooperating fully, but the cameras kept rolling and the internet was already spitting out its verdict. I felt something in my chest give a little, some thin band of hope snapping back after months of being stretched to breaking, not because I relished her downfall. That'd make me small. But because the country that took my son's name and turned it into a brand might finally give me a sliver of what was mine. Truth. After all those nights hunched over courthouse copies and scribbled notes, after Rick sweating his way through back alleys and backroom deals to get me proof, the laws themselves had started moving. That packet I'd mailed, anonymous, certified, more hope than plan, had lit a fuse. Within days, it was like watching a slow motion unraveling. Federal agents moved in with quiet efficiency. Her accounts were frozen. Banks put holds on lines of credit. The board convened emergency meetings that didn't include her smiling face. Investors who once trailed her like puppies backed away, then flat out pulled out. The social pages that had once toasted her with syrupy headlines now hungered for scandal. Sam's name trended, and the trend didn't stop at a few mean-spirited tweets. It bled into people who mattered. Creditors, regulators, board members who suddenly remembered they had scruples. Properties were flagged, deeds were re-examined, and overnight the woman who'd been untouchable became, in the eyes of the city, a problem to be contained. It was surreal to see it all happen on screens and in print. People I'd known for years, old clients and builders, would give me that look now. The one that said they'd always believed me deep down. A few nodded in town and then looked away like they didn't want to be seen consoling a man the papers said was a bereaved father with an axe to grind. Pride's a funny thing. It tucks itself away when the world needs you to show some dignity, and then it reappears when the world proves you right. Noah got caught in the middle like a kid stuck in a storm. With everything hanging in the balance, child services and family lawyers stepped in and, for stability's sake, arrangements were made. He was sent to Sam's sister's house out of state while the legal dust settled. I didn't get to argue much. The courts move fast when they smell chaos. That boy who used to run up the porch steps yelling, "Grandpa Walt," suddenly belonged to other calendars, other schedules, more hands than mine. I'd call, and a polite voice would say, "He's with family at the moment," and hang up. It hurt in a way I can't always put into words. It's a hollow ache, as if the house inside you has lost its roof. And then, almost as if the universe had a sense of dark humor, she came to me. It was a warm, windless afternoon. I was sweeping up cigarette butts and motel flyers outside our door, trying to keep busy, when a black SUV rolled up and pulled into the dusty lot like it owned the place. For a beat, I thought it was another tired traveler. Then the door opened and Sam stepped out. No sunglasses, no perfect suit. Her hair was a mess, dark circles under her eyes, makeup smeared like she'd been crying for days. Her clothes hung on her in a way that made money look like a costume rather than armor. She did not look like the woman whose laugh had once filled our dining room. She looked small. She walked up to me with that unsteady gait lost to panic. "Walter," she said, voice trembling. The kind of tremble that could be fear or sorrow or both. Her lips were cracked and there was dirt under her nails. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman who'd shipped me out of my own home weeks before. This was a person stripped of what made her dangerous. The gloss. I'll admit, mate, my first instinct was to shut the door in her face. I pictured it. Me, the broken old man, refusing to help the architect of my ruin. I imagined the headlines. "Bitter father-in-law denies aid to fallen widow." People love a neat moral. But life isn't neat, and neither am I. Something else ran through me then, not mercy, not yet, but curiosity. How low could she fall, and why was she standing in front of me asking for help? "Walter, I need your help," she said, and the words came out like confession. They were simple and, for once, not dressed in the rehearsed politeness that used to set my teeth on edge. She looked like someone who'd been stripped of her audience and now had to face the person she'd wronged. Her mouth trembled as she added, "Please. I don't know where else to go. They froze the accounts. I can't see Noah. I'm scared." There was a madness to the scene. The woman who'd turned my life to rubble now standing at my feet asking the very man she'd discarded for a lifeline. I felt 100 things at once. Anger, satisfaction, a cold thrill of vindication. A churning worry for that boy who only wanted both of his grandparents to be home. I looked at her and saw the same fear I'd felt the night I hung a cardboard cross at Linda's grave. The raw, human kind, not the suit and tie variety. That moment was a pivot. The scales had begun to tilt back. The press would have a field day, sure, but I was past caring what the press said. All I knew was this. Karma, or the law, or whatever you want to call it, had come knocking on her door. Whether I opened mine to her would be a different story, one I wanted to write carefully. So I stood there with my broom in hand, staring at the woman who'd once been part of my family, and I made a choice that would shape everything that came after. Not a snap decision, not a vengeful lash, but a deliberate one. Because when someone who's done you wrong finally comes back hollowed out and begging, you don't react. You consider. You test, you watch, and yes, you might just let them see the bottom before you decide to pull them back up. That right there, watching her with her head bowed and the city's judgment closing in, was the turn. The point where the fight changed from a private fury into a public reckoning, where law and shame and instinct all tangled into a knot I was finally ready to untie. I couldn't believe my eyes. The same woman who'd once strutted through marble foyers and cocktail parties with a glass of champagne and a diamond smile, was now standing outside my dingy motel door, clutching her purse like a lost child. The sun was low, throwing a harsh orange light across the parking lot, and for a moment it made her look almost ghostly, like a shadow of the person she used to be. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, heart beating steady but heavy. "Help?" I said, letting the word hang in the air. "That's rich. You've got some nerve showing up here, Sam." Her chin trembled. For a heartbeat, she looked like she might fire back with that same sharp tongue she'd used to talk down to me years ago. But instead, she broke. Tears welled up, spilling down her cheeks as her voice cracked. "They took everything," she said. "The company, the cars, even the house. I don't have anywhere to go. Please, Walter. I'm sorry for what I did. I swear I am." Her words came out in pieces like glass breaking on the floor. I just stood there staring at her. There she was. The same woman who'd kicked me and Linda out of our home without blinking. The same woman who'd told my 10-year-old grandson that his grandfather didn't belong there anymore. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, lock it, and let the silence answer for me. But another part of me, the part that still heard my son Ethan's laugh, that still remembered his voice saying, "Dad, family is family no matter what," couldn't do it. Ethan had always believed in forgiveness, even when people didn't deserve it. So I stepped aside and said quietly, "Come in." She hesitated, then walked inside, clutching that purse like it was the last thing keeping her together. Her heels clicked on the linoleum floor, and I swear I could see the disbelief in her eyes when she looked around the place. One room, 2 creaky beds, a single flickering light. The air smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. "Is this where you've been living?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said flatly. "Thanks to you." She flinched, her eyes darting to the floor. "I didn't mean for it to end like this. I thought I was doing what was best for Noah." I couldn't help a bitter laugh. "No, Sam," I said, my voice low but sharp. "You thought you could control it all. There's a difference." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence that followed was thick, not angry, just heavy. Like 2 ghosts sitting in a room full of things unsaid. After a long minute, she spoke again. "When the investigation started, I panicked. I didn't know who to trust. My lawyers left. The board turned their backs, and everyone I thought was loyal to me, and they disappeared. I kept thinking maybe it would all blow over, but it didn't. It just kept getting worse." I didn't respond. I just watched her. She looked so small now. Her confidence, that armor of wealth and power, had cracked. The woman who once ruled boardrooms was sitting on a stained motel bed with her head in her hands. "I lost everything, Walter," she said softly. "I lost my home, my reputation, my son." When she said my son, something in me stirred. A deep, old ache. Ethan would have wanted me to listen. Not to forgive, maybe not yet, but to listen. She took a deep breath, then looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "They won't let me near Noah," she said, her voice breaking. "Child services say I'm unstable. They're talking about placing him permanently with my sister. I can't lose him, Walter, please. You're the only family he has left. If you vouch for me, if you tell them I'm not a danger, they'll let me see him. Please help me. I'll do anything." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, really looked. And what I saw wasn't the woman who'd hurt me anymore. What sat in front of me was someone who'd finally been stripped of her pride, her lies, and her excuses. It was strange seeing her like that. So human, so breakable. I thought of Noah, his wide grin, his little toy trucks, the way he used to fall asleep on my chest when he was small. I thought of Linda, how she'd wanted peace, not revenge. And I thought of Ethan, my boy who'd built a life out of hard work and trust, only for it all to be torn apart by greed. Finally, I stood up, walked over to the door, and rested my hand on the knob. "You'll get to see him," I said quietly. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. "But not," I continued, "until you make things right." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" I met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "You're going to fix what you broke, Sam. You'll cooperate with the investigators. You'll return whatever money you can. You'll admit what you did, publicly. And only then, maybe, you'll get to see that boy again. But not before." Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment she just stared at me. Then she nodded slowly. Once. Twice. As if the weight of the truth had finally settled on her shoulders. I opened the door and said, "Go get yourself together. The world might have taken everything from you, but you still have a choice left. To do the right thing." She stood, clutching her purse tighter, and walked out without another word. As the door shut behind her, I leaned against it and let out a long breath. My hands were shaking, not from anger but from something else. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was the ghost of Ethan finally resting easy. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a man who'd stood up, not with rage but with resolve. And I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just her downfall. It was the beginning of my redemption. Over the next few months, something unexpected happened. Something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. Samantha stayed in the motel next door. The same woman who once lived in a mansion with marble floors and chandeliers now shared walls with truck drivers, single moms, and old men running from their pasts. The first few weeks were hard on her. You could tell by the way she avoided eye contact with the other guests, or how she'd sit in her car for long stretches before heading into her room, as if she couldn't quite accept this new reality. But slowly, day by day, she began to change. She got a job at a diner a few blocks away, a little roadside place called Darla's Kitchen, the kind of spot that smelled like coffee and pancakes no matter what time of day you walked in. She started as a dishwasher, then moved to waiting tables. Minimum wage, double shifts, and no sympathy from anyone. But she took it, every bit of it, without complaint. I'd see her through the diner window sometimes, balancing trays, smiling politely at customers, her once manicured hands now red and rough from scrubbing dishes. The woman who used to command boardrooms was now serving pie and refilling coffee cups for truckers and traveling salesmen. And the strangest thing was, she didn't seem broken by it. She seemed grounded. I'd pass her on my morning walks and she'd nod politely, sometimes even smile. A real one. Not the polished social smile she used to wear like armor. There was humility in her now. The pride, the arrogance, the need to control everything, and it was gone. What replaced it was something closer to peace. One afternoon I saw her walking up the hill to the cemetery. She was holding a bouquet of lilies, Linda's favorite. I followed at a distance, not wanting to intrude. She knelt by Linda's grave for a long while, her head bowed. The breeze carried bits of her voice to me, just fragments, apologies, maybe prayers. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. I knew what they were when she finally stood. She brushed the dust from her knees, placed her hand on the headstone, and whispered something I'll never forget. I could barely make it out, but I heard enough. You deserved better from me. That night she knocked on my door. I could tell from her face she'd been crying again, but not from guilt this time, from release. "Walter," she said softly, standing there with her hands clasped like a child waiting to be scolded. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make things right, whatever that means." For a long time I just looked at her. The woman in front of me wasn't the same person who'd destroyed my family. She was stripped down, raw, honest. There was no act left, no pretense. Finally I said, "Start by being a mother to your boy. That's all that matters now. He's innocent in all this." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Over the following weeks, we started working together, and not as enemies or even as in-laws, but as two broken people trying to rebuild something for the sake of a child. With the help of an old friend of mine, an attorney named Harris, who owed me a few favors, we managed to establish a small trust fund for Noah. It wasn't much, but it was enough to secure his schooling and give him a start in life. Most of what Sam had left was tied up in legal settlements and seized assets, but she insisted on contributing every cent she could from her paychecks. "It's not about the money anymore," she told me one evening as we went over the papers at the diner counter after closing. "It's about finally doing something right." I smiled faintly. "You don't need millions to raise him right. Sam, you just need to be there." She nodded slowly, and I could see the truth of that sinking in, and she was. She visited Noah every weekend at her sister's house, showing up with handmade lunches and secondhand toys she'd cleaned and fixed herself. She started saving again, not to buy luxury but stability. She worked overtime, paid her debts, attended counseling. It wasn't easy. Redemption never is. But she stayed the course. A months passed and something shifted between us. The resentment that once burned inside me like a slow fire began to fade. In its place grew something quieter. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. One evening we sat outside the motel, both of us silent, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air smelled of rain and earth. Sam turned to me and said, "You know, I used to think strength meant having power and control. Now I think it means getting up every morning, facing the mess you made, and not running from it." I nodded. "Took me a lifetime to learn that lesson too." She smiled faintly. "Guess we're both slow learners." We laughed. The first real laugh we'd shared in years. It wasn't forced. It wasn't bitter. It was human. That night, as I watched her walk back to her room, I realized that maybe redemption isn't about erasing the past. Maybe it's about owning it, learning from it, bleeding from it, and somehow finding your way back to the light. For the first time, I saw Samantha not as the woman who ruined my life, but as someone who had finally started living hers. Not perfectly, not easily, but honestly, and in a quiet, unspoken way, I think that's all Ethan would have wanted. Years have passed now. The seasons have changed more times than I care to count, and so has the man I see in the mirror every morning. The wrinkles have deepened, the hair's thinned out to a fine silver, and my hands, the same ones that once built homes, tremble a little when I hold my coffee mug. But the heart? It's steadier than ever. I still live in that same small town. Moved out of the motel a few years back and found myself a modest little house near the river. Nothing fancy, just a place where the mornings smell of wet grass and the evenings hum with crickets. I fixed up the porch myself, planted some roses along the walkway, and built a small wooden bench under the big oak out front. That's where I sit most evenings, watching the sun dip behind the water, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Noah's in college now. Architecture of all things, just like his old man. Funny how life comes full circle like that. Sometimes I catch him sketching bridges or old houses in his notebook when he visits, and for a moment, I swear I see Ethan's spirit sitting right there beside him. Same focus in his eyes, same quiet determination. He comes every Sunday without fail, brings stories about his classes, about the friends he's made, and sometimes about the girl he's too shy to tell his mother about. And speaking of his mother, and yes, Sam still comes too, she's different now. Not just in looks, though life has certainly humbled her in that way, but in spirit. There's a calmness about her these days, a kind of grace that wasn't there before. She still works at the diner part-time, though she's moved up to managing the place now. Runs it with honesty, treats her staff like family. She's learned the hard way that leadership isn't about control. It's about care, and every Sunday, without fail, she brings a pie. Always homemade, always with that same line she's been saying for years now. Just a little thank you, Walter. I don't correct her anymore. I just smile, slice us all a piece, and we sit there on the porch, 3 generations, eating pie, trading memories, and watching the river glow beneath the setting sun. One afternoon, not too long ago, Noah turned to me as the sky turned crimson and asked, "Grandpa, do you ever miss the old ranch?" I paused, looked out at the fading light, and thought about it. About the house, the land, the laughter that once filled those halls. About the pain that followed. About the ghosts that still lingered in those walls. Then I smiled. "Nah, mate," I said softly. "The view's better here. No money in the world can buy peace of mind." He grinned that same crooked grin his father used to have and said, "Dad would have liked that," and I believed him. We sat there in silence after that, just listening to the soft rush of the river and the distant hum of the town settling into night. The world felt smaller, kinder, like it had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. That was when it hit me. The truth I'd spent most of my life chasing. You see, revenge doesn't always mean destruction. It's not about making someone suffer or proving you're right. Sometimes the best revenge is stepping back and letting life do what it does best. Balance the scales in its own quiet way. Samantha lost everything that money could buy, but in doing so she found what it never could: humility, purpose, forgiveness. And me, I lost the life I thought I needed, only to find the peace I'd been searching for all along. Money comes and goes. Houses fall apart, names fade. But integrity, that's the one thing that never rusts, never cracks, never loses value. And in the end, that's what this whole journey was about. Not vengeance, not justice, but redemption. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, remember my story, because one day life will test you. It'll take something precious, maybe break your heart in half, and you'll stand at a crossroads between greed and grace, between hatred and healing. And when that moment comes, I hope you'll think of me, an old man who lost everything and found something better. Because peace of mind, my friend, that's the one thing money could never buy.